Mark, in Skulk, you adopt a literary technique that I haven't seen before. You underline some words. For instance, on page 59, you've underlined 3 words: you, renounce, and anything. Why do you do this? What is the significance does it have? And I noticed in your other books you didn't, at least in Julius, you didn't adopt that technique.
Trying to find this place. In general, it's not a new technique. When in the days of typewriting, it was done with underlines. In the days of computer, it's now done with italics, and it just says that this is an emphasized word, and sometimes in a sentence, which word is emphasized changes the meaning of this sentence. Like, you don't do that. If I say you don't do that, means you haven't done something. Right? But if I say you don't do that, that means you shouldn't do something. So in sentences that are either equivocal, like that, or in which you just want to make sure that the reader hears the same voice that you hear, you can use that. And you try to do it sparsely, because the sentences should speak for themselves and have a shape where they shape themselves into the correct emphases. Right? This chapter, I think, is when they're both high on acid, and so it's sort of out of the normal frame of the way they talk to one another. So the other thing that I've discovered is that it's a very bad idea to go for the final version of a book before you've read it out loud. And that a lot of changes come. If you try to take this text, which looks good on paper, and then you try to read it out loud, all of a sudden things become obvious. And so what I've tried to do lately is not to say this is done until I've read the whole thing out loud. And reading it out loud, when you do that, and when you read it for audiences, when you do a reading and signing or whatever, you tend to do that. Make sure when you read this sentence you emphasize this word, so you underline words. It's not at all a new technique, although I think editors don't like to see it a lot, as they probably shouldn't, because they want the sentences to read themselves.
I was impressed with it because I hadn't seen it in many other books. But it is interesting, and it adds to the understanding of the sentence, as you say. You write about a secessionist movement in Kansas. My last show was about secession for Vermont. How do you feel about the secessionist movement here in Vermont?
Yeah. Well, this book is not about the secessionist movement in Kansas. That's just it was a setting for the political activity of one of the characters. The history professor is in Kansas. He's teaching in Wichita, and he's a political activist. And what is he active about? So the thing that I thought could be fun was for him to be working in a free Kansas operation, or trying to publicize it the way the Second Vermont Republic is happening here. It's active, it's imaginative. I saw the show you did with Tom Naylor. It was very good, very interesting. I'm not myself working in that area. I mean, I have a limited amount of political time, and I'm putting it into 9/11 stuff and into Israel-Palestine stuff. So, on the other hand, I think it's a fabulous lens to look at the United States through at the moment. It's in a certain way, a utopian dream, and a good analysis of what's happening. I've been thinking, gee, I'd love to. This is not going to happen, but I don't think I'd like to expatriate. I don't want to live in a country that's essentially involved in bombing the world to get its own ends. And when you look seriously into where one would go, who would accept you, it's very, very hard. So should I move to Sweden where they have a good social movement? You go on the website for Sweden, and it says, it is the very first thing it says, it is very hard to immigrate to Sweden. And in general, that's the thing. So look at this wonderful thing. You don't have to move. You don't have to leave your beloved Vermont. You can stay in your house. And Vermont secedes. All of a sudden, you're living in another country.
We could create Sweden right here in Vermont.
We could create Sweden or better. Sweden's too big. Right? And we can do it better. So it would be absolutely terrific for the Second Vermont Republic, possibly associated with, the maritime provinces or Maine or whatever regional kind of affair to secede from the United States. Is it realistic? I think less so than Tom thinks. Bread and Puppet's been very involved. Every year there's a Second Vermont Republic show. I've talked to Peter about it, and he sees it, I guess, the way I'm reflecting now, as a really good, if nothing else, terrific metaphor and a good lens and a good analysis tool about what's going on and why it's going on and what it has to do with size and what it has to do with democracy and the theory of democracy and all of that. So it's interesting to me as a movement. The other amazing thing about it, and this book took quite a bit of research, although it's a small book, was learning about the history of Kansas. Because there was a free Republic of Kansas. And in fact, there was a whole pre-Civil War in Kansas just before the Civil War. And it was called Bleeding Kansas. And if you Google Bleeding Kansas, you get into this history of Kansas being the locus of a struggle between slavers coming up from the south and the abolitionists coming in from the east. And they were fighting each other. It's where John Brown got his start in Kansas and Osawatomie. And so it's an essential, the whole free state of Kansas was an essential part of American history that I didn't know about before I started working on this book. And John Brown shows up as a character in the book, and he writes letters from the grave to give the characters advice and all of that. So the whole Kansas aspect got very, very rich just by doing this, by arbitrarily saying, hey, why don't I have him involved in the Second Kansas Republic thing? Except it wasn't second. See, Vermont did have an independent republic, but Kansas did have a movement for the free state, meaning no slavery, of Kansas. So that's how that got in there.
One of the websites you cite here on page 160 is the www.freekansas.org.
Yeah,
is that one of the real websites?
No, I made it up. There is no, as far as I know, I mean, maybe there is. Maybe there's the analog of the Second Vermont Republic, but I think that's the only, I did that to situate it and him and his work in Kansas. And I even made a poster with tear-offs on the bottom that has that as the website address that people should go to and phone number and all that. So, but that's clearly. I should, if I were a good reader, I would go online and see if there was such a thing.
But some of the websites you cite,
all the other ones, all the 9/11.
The 9/11 ones are all right.
Yeah.